kill him when I've got a baby of my own.
I'm trying
If I wanted to kill a baby, I'd kill my own, wouldn't I?
These were the statements hours before the whole nation would learn of a brutal, heinous, and unspeakably evil crime. A crime so disturbing, so unfathomable, that it would scar the collective conscience of Britain forever. A crime committed not by a shadowy adult predator, but by two 10-year-old boys. Boys who, by all appearances, should have been in school learning multiplication or playing tag on the playground. Instead, they were orchestrating the kind of horror most adults couldn't even imagine. So brutal that you don't need to see the crime scene photos. You only need to hear one detail: 42 separate injuries, a crushed skull, paint splashed in his eye, batteries jammed into his tiny mouth, a toddler, just 2 years old, lured away from his mother in a crowded shopping mall, and murdered by two boys who weren't even old enough to ride a roller coaster alone. This isn't just one of the most disturbing child deaths in British history. It's one that forces a horrifying question. What happens when evil wears the face of a child?
A crime that horrified and transfixed.
That it could be done by juveniles or even children was off the scale.
Before we continue, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. It helps spread these stories so more people can hear them. Now James Patrick Bulger was just a few weeks shy of his 3rd birthday. A chubby-cheeked boy with big blue eyes, the kind of child who made strangers smile as they passed him in the street. He loved toy soldiers, riding the shopping trolley, and mimicking his father's football chants with a proud little puff in his chest. On the afternoon of February 12, 1993, his mother, Denise Fergus, took him to the New Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, Merseyside. A routine errand, just a short trip. They stopped by the butcher's, A.R. Tim's, where Denise let go of his tiny hand for mere seconds to pay for a piece of meat. When she looked down again, James was gone. At first, Denise thought he'd simply toddled to the shop entrance. She sprinted outside, shouting his name, scanning the crowd for that familiar jacket. Mall security was alerted. The police were called, but no one could have guessed the scale of the horror already unfolding. James wasn't lost. He hadn't wandered off. He had been taken, targeted, not by a predator in the shadows, but by two schoolboys who looked like they should have been asking their mums for pocket money. John Venables and Robert Thompson were both 10 years old. Both had skipped school that day. But this wasn't your average mischief. These two boys weren't stealing sweets or kicking a football into traffic. They were lurking in the shopping center, watching, waiting. Earlier that same day, they'd attempted to abduct another child. That child's mother intervened. James's mother didn't get the chance. The CCTV captured a haunting image. Two older boys calmly leading a toddler away, his tiny hand curled trustingly into one of theirs. What followed was a nearly 3-mile walk. Through crowded roads, back alleys, canal paths, places where dozens of people saw them, questioned them, but ultimately let them pass. Some witnesses said James looked upset. Others noticed bruises on his face. But when the boys claimed they were taking their little brother home, no one pressed further. One woman later said, "They just looked like two kids being cheeky." No one imagined they were escorting James to his death. As they walked, the abuse began. At first, it was subtle, shoving, tripping. Then, it escalated. The boys dropped James on his head, kicked him when he cried, and continued dragging him toward the railway tracks near Walton and Anfield Station. There, shielded from view by an embankment, they carried out one of the most grotesque child murders in British legal history. They threw bricks. They hurled stones. They beat him with a 10-kilogram iron bar known as a railway fish plate. One blow struck with such force it shattered his skull into 10 separate fractures. They smeared his face with blue paint, jammed batteries into his mouth, and, though later disputed, allegedly inserted them elsewhere too. And when it was over, they laid his body across the train tracks, hoping a passing train would sever his remains and mask the evidence as an accident. But the train strike didn't hide the truth. A forensic pathologist, Dr. Alan Williams documented 42 separate injuries. It was clear James had died before the train hit him, and none of those injuries alone could be identified as the fatal blow. He had been tortured, methodically, sadistically. It was evil without logic, without purpose, just cruelty, pure and undiluted, from two boys who should have been in year 6. 2 days after his disappearance, James's body was discovered by children playing near the railway. What they found didn't look like a child. It was too brutal, too broken. Police were called. The public recoiled in horror. A toddler had been abducted and murdered. But even then, no one could comprehend that the killers were children themselves. Investigators scoured the CCTV, zooming in on the image of the 2 boys walking with James. The photo was grainy, but clear enough to circulate. A media frenzy followed. Tip lines exploded with calls, and eventually, a woman recognized the clothes one of the boys was wearing. She called the police. That boy was John Venables. John was arrested first. When questioned, he broke down quickly. Robert Thompson was picked up shortly after. The evidence against them was staggering. Blood on Thompson's shoe matched James's DNA. The paint found on James's face matched the same brand smeared on their clothes. Even the bruising on James's cheek matched the pattern of Thompson's shoe upper. But the most chilling detail? Neither boy showed real remorse. Venables cried. But not for James. He cried for himself.
Bobby, I came round to your house this morning, didn't I?
Yeah.
What did I say to you?
You're listening?
Correct. What for?
James,
James, what about James?
that you said on suspicion of murdering him.
Well, very well remembered. Did you ever see him in the Strand? You shook your head again.
Yeah.
Bobby, was that on the day that we're talking about? Was that on this Friday? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were going up the escalators, they were going through the doors that there's loads of.
Who was he with?
No,
Little James.
his mum.
With his mum. He was just running around, was he, James?
Yeah.
Will you tell me exactly what? Slowly, right?
He just said, come here. And then he grabbed his hands and walked up to stand.
I know the truth. I believe I know the truth.
I was there.
That's
You
right.
waved.
Correct, but I know that a lot of things that have gone on.
Yeah, well, do you know it was me that killed him? It wasn't. I never even killed him. I'm gonna end up getting all the blame because I've got blood on me.
We're asking you, son, and we want you to tell us the truth, that's all. Not give the blame to you or anything else. But it's only the truth that we're
Yeah, well,
concerned
Johnny
about.
threw a brick in his face.
You were in Bootle New Strand.
Was you in Bootle Strand?
We never got a kid, Mum. We never got a
Mrs.
kid.
Venables, would you? I must ask you not to get angry with it.
I never got the boy. I never killed him, Mum.
And he said that you took him by the hand and led him out of the Strand shops.
We never. He's a liar.
Calm down. Oh my gosh.
All right, come on, look. But the God's honest truth.
God's honest truth, I'm telling you that we never. He was too scared. He was probably too scared.
A short while ago, as is detailed on your custody record out there, you had a conversation with your mum and you then requested that myself come into the room. Is that right? Yeah. And what was it you told us?
That I killed James.
Their trial began on November 1st, 1993, at Preston Crown Court. It was held in an adult courtroom. Both boys sat in the dock wearing suits, dwarfed by their surroundings, barely tall enough to peer over the bench. Prosecutor Richard Henriquez, K.C., laid out the facts with unflinching detail. Justice Michael Moreland presided over the case. And after 23 days, on November 24th, the jury found both boys guilty of abduction and murder. They were sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite term with a recommended minimum of 8 years. But even that didn't feel like enough. The public outcry was deafening. Many wanted life. Others demanded the death penalty. The Home Secretary eventually raised the tariff to 15 years, only for the law lords to strike it down in 1997. The legal system was reeling, trying to make sense of how to punish evil that didn't look evil, how to cage a monster that still believed in Santa Claus. This trial left the country asking, how did two children come to do this? Was it nature, nurture, a system that failed them both? That question would haunt the nation for decades, and it's where our story begins to peel deeper into the shadows of who these boys really were, what their lives looked like before and after James Bulger, and what it truly means when innocence becomes a mask for monstrous intent. Because as we'll soon see, this wasn't the end of the horror. It was only the beginning. John Venables was born on August 13, 1982. At first glance, his upbringing seemed relatively stable. 2 parents, a roof over his head, a younger sibling. But stability in appearance doesn't always match reality. His home life had cracks, and by 10 years old, John had developed disturbing habits. He was known for violent outbursts at school, flipping desks, threatening other kids, even harming himself. Teachers noticed he was volatile, that he craved attention, and when he didn't get it, he unraveled. But what's chilling in hindsight is how those behaviors weren't flagged more seriously. He wasn't just acting out. He was falling apart, and no one knew how far that spiral would go. Robert Thompson's story was even more fractured. He was the 5th of 7 children in a household plagued by poverty and violence. His father abandoned the family when Robert was 5. His mother, overwhelmed and struggling with alcohol, withdrew from parenting entirely. Their home in Walton was a place of chaos. Sometimes no electricity, no food, no adult supervision. Robert began skipping school, stealing, fighting. He ran wild, often alongside his older brothers, some of whom had already been in trouble with the law. By age 10, Robert was a master manipulator, known for his sharp tongue and ability to twist situations. But beneath that cunning was a boy who had learned that cruelty equals control. The prosecution would later argue that Robert was the ringleader, that he planned it, controlled it, and used John as an accomplice. But even now, more than 30 years later, the question of who led and who followed remains deeply debated. John was more emotionally unstable. Robert was more calculated. But both were complicit, both were active, and both, at some point in that walk to the tracks, could have stopped. They didn't. Investigators like Detective Superintendent Albert Kirby dug through the boys' school records, their behavioral history, their friendships, or lack thereof. What emerged was a chilling pattern. Both had a fascination with violence. John had been known to watch horror films beyond his age rating. Robert had been caught bullying smaller children, once holding a knife to a classmate's throat during a playground fight. But what stunned detectives wasn't just the history, it was the lack of adult intervention. These weren't isolated red flags. They were fireworks. And still, somehow, the system let them slip through. At their trial, a child psychiatrist testified that neither boy truly understood the concept of death, that they didn't grasp the finality of what they had done, but others disagreed. They pointed to how John cried when he was arrested, not because James was dead, but because he thought he'd get in trouble. They noted how Robert, when asked why they placed James on the train tracks, said plainly, "So people would think it was an accident." These weren't the words of innocence. They were evidence of intent. And it wasn't just experts debating. The entire country was watching, horrified and furious. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered daily. People screamed "killers" at the prison vans. Parents wept openly. Journalists printed every possible angle. And in every pub, every kitchen table discussion across the UK, one question kept echoing: Should 10-year-olds really be held responsible like adults? Legally, they could be. The age of criminal responsibility in England and Wales was, and still is, 10. But emotionally, philosophically, that's where the lines blurred. The trial wasn't just about justice for James. It became a referendum on childhood, morality, punishment, and whether society had a role in creating these killers. And when the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, the reaction was volcanic. Relief, yes, but also rage, because no sentence felt like it could ever match the crime. 8 years. That was the minimum recommendation. 8 years for 42 injuries. 8 years for the life of a toddler. When Lord Chief Justice Taylor later raised it to 10 years, the public still cried foul. So then the Home Secretary stepped in, raising it to 15. But that too would unravel. In 1997, the law lords ruled that politicians couldn't set sentences. It was unconstitutional. The boys' term was reset to 10 years, and in 2001, just shy of their 19th birthdays, both were released, with new identities. Under strict lifelong anonymity orders granted by Dame Elizabeth Butler Sloss, the state relocated them, gave them new names, new homes, and new pasts. No one would ever know where they went, at least not officially. But anonymity is a thin curtain in the internet age, and in Venable's case, that curtain would be pulled back more than once. That's where this story fractures into something even more twisted. Because John Venables didn't disappear into a quiet life, he reoffended, twice. In 2010, he was caught with hundreds of images of child sexual abuse, some described as beyond horrific. He was sentenced to 2 years. Then, in 2018, he did it again. More images, more children, more pain, and again, prison. In December 2023, the parole board reviewed his case. They refused his release. Again. But the outrage had reignited. For many, it was proof that some people cannot be rehabilitated. That evil, once exposed, doesn't simply vanish behind a fake name and a fresh postcode. It festers. And when it festers in someone like John Venables, it becomes a threat not just to the memory of James Bulger, but to every child walking alone in a shopping mall. And what about Robert Thompson? Unlike Venables, Thompson has never reoffended, at least not publicly. He's remained hidden, silent, invisible. Some argue he rebuilt his life. Others believe he merely perfected the art of camouflage. The truth? Only a handful of people know, and they're sworn to secrecy under threat of jail. But even in silence, his name lingers in the public imagination like a phantom in the dark. What kind of adult did he become? Is he still haunted? Is he proud? Is he watching this video right now? That's the terrifying part. When killers hide behind anonymity, we don't just lose sight of who they are. We lose the ability to hold them accountable, to know if they've changed, or if they've just gotten better at hiding the monster underneath. And still, through all of it, the trials, the reoffending, the debates, one truth cuts through the noise. James Bulger was just a baby, a 2-year-old boy with his whole life ahead of him. He didn't get second chances. He didn't get name changes. He didn't get protection. All he got was a brutal, lonely death at the hands of 2 boys who smiled for the cameras the day they were sentenced. But this story is far from over, because what happened after their release sparked a legal and political war, one that's still raging to this day. And as public anger grew louder, the government found itself facing a new question. When justice fails the victim, who protects the rest of us? Denise Fergus, James's mother, didn't have the luxury of closure. She never got to bury her pain beneath the weight of time. Every time she left her house, she felt the eyes of strangers, some filled with sympathy, others with pity. But none of them could feel what she did. The sound of James's laugh, the way he'd tug on her sleeve, the tiny hand that vanished from her grasp in seconds. Denise wasn't just mourning, she was fighting. She became one of the most vocal campaigners in the country, demanding justice, transparency, and above all, accountability. In the early 2000s, Denise joined forces with Ralph Bulger, James's father, to challenge the decision to release John Venables and Robert Thompson. They weren't just angry about the sentence, they were furious about the anonymity, because those new identities came with protections the average citizen couldn't even dream of. The boys were moved to new homes, given therapy, social workers, education, job placements. It was, in the eyes of many, a reward disguised as rehabilitation. The public had questions, and the government had few answers. Were Venables and Thompson truly reformed? Where were they living? What safety measures were in place to protect others if they slipped again? But every time someone tried to expose their whereabouts, online, in tabloid papers, or even in pub conversations, gag orders came crashing down. The High Court enforced lifelong anonymity with an iron fist. Breaking it could land someone in jail, and some people did. Still, the government stood firm. Lifelong anonymity was upheld. The reasoning? If either man's identity was revealed, they could be harmed or even killed by vigilantes. And while that fear wasn't unfounded, the cost of that protection was public trust. Because secrecy breeds suspicion. And suspicion, in a case like this, is gasoline on fire. The story reached Parliament once again in March 2024. A petition calling for a public inquiry into the James Bulger case had gained massive traction, hundreds of thousands of signatures. It wasn't just about rehashing the past. It was about uncovering whether there had been institutional failures, whether the systems that were supposed to protect James had instead created two killers, and whether those same systems were now shielding one of them as he continued to pose a threat to children. But even as the government debated, even as the media covered every angle, the man at the center of it all, John Venables, remained behind bars. His most recent parole hearing, in December 2023, ended with another refusal. The board concluded he still posed a high risk to children, that he hadn't shown the necessary rehabilitation to re-enter society, and that meant one thing: the monster was still caged. But for how long? That's the question that continues to haunt families, lawmakers, and the public alike. Because each new hearing is a ticking clock. And while James's parents continue to fight, to speak out, to petition, to push for legislative reform, they do so knowing the system is built to forget, built to move on, built to protect the very people who stole everything from them. And as for Robert Thompson, he remains a ghost, no reoffending, no headlines, no slip-ups, which to some is proof that the system worked, that rehabilitation is possible. But to others, it's just the quiet before the next storm. Because if even one of these boys could commit such horror at age 10, what's to stop it from happening again to someone else? Because as much as we want to believe this was a freak tragedy, one that could never happen again, the truth is more complicated. And the closer we look at the timeline, the choices, and the systemic failures, the more it starts to feel like James Bulger's death wasn't just the result of evil, it was the result of neglect, silence, and denial at every level. And once you see that pattern, you start to wonder how many other children are already slipping through the cracks. It didn't happen in a vacuum. That's the part that lingers after the headlines fade. James Bulger's death wasn't simply about two broken boys acting alone. It was about every moment, every missed chance, every adult who saw a red flag and did nothing. Because when you pull back the camera and look at the broader picture, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. The cracks were always there, and they were wide enough for a child to fall through, head first. By the time John Venables and Robert Thompson found themselves on the dock in Preston Crown Court, their lives had already been a long string of failures, excuses, and overlooked signs. Schools knew, social workers knew, even neighbors had an inkling that something wasn't right. But no one believed that not acting would lead to something as horrific as the torture and murder of a 2-year-old. It's easier to believe a child needs help than to believe a child might kill. One of the most heartbreaking revelations that surfaced later was this. Just weeks before the murder, Both boys had been flagged for a behavioral review, but nothing came of it. No intervention, no psychologist, no follow-up. Just two boys falling through the cracks of a system designed to notice, but only when it's convenient. This failure didn't end in the school system. It extended to the very streets they walked. Dozens of people saw James Bulger being dragged, pulled, and abused along that long walk to the railway tracks. Some of them saw tears, some of them heard him crying, others noticed bruises. At least one person considered stopping the boys. Another wondered if the toddler looked too young to be their brother. But none of them intervened. Was it fear of getting involved? A belief that someone else would step in? Or just the dangerous assumption that because they were kids, they couldn't possibly be doing anything that terrible? That single belief, the idea that children are incapable of monstrous acts, may be the most dangerous lie of all. And so the Bulger family continues their crusade. They've pushed for open parole hearings. They've fought for changes in anonymity laws. They've tried to reopen investigations. They've even petitioned for James's Law, a proposed legislative reform to allow public oversight of repeat child offenders. Some in government have listened. Others have dismissed it. But what's never changed is the force of their grief. The rawness in Denise's voice when she speaks about James. The way Ralph's hands shake when he looks at old family photos. They've lived with a kind of pain that has no bottom, no closure, only questions. Because when a society lets children fall through the cracks, when it allows systems to overlook signs of evil and then hides that evil behind legal curtains, it has to ask, who's it really protecting? Is it the innocent? Or the ones we hope we'll never see again? As we head into the final chapter of this story, one truth becomes disturbingly clear. The justice system didn't just fail James once. It continues to fail him every time John Venables is protected. Every time the truth is hidden. Every time silence is chosen over accountability. And it raises one final chilling question. If we cannot protect our most vulnerable, what kind of future are we building? The past can't be rewritten. James Bulger will always be 2 years old. His final moments will always be shrouded in violence, confusion, and heartbreak. But the future, that's the battleground now. And for the people left behind, the ones still carrying James's name like a wound that never healed, that future must mean something. It must change something. Because if we let it slip into history without reflection, without reform, then we're just waiting for the next child to fall. James's murder wasn't just a singular tragedy. It became a mirror. One that forced an entire nation to stare back at itself and ask, who are we when we lose a child this way? And who do we become when we let the people who caused it walk back into the world, protected, unnamed, and unaccountable? That's what has kept this story alive. Not just the horror of what happened, but the rage over how little was done after. Because despite all the press conferences, the debates in Parliament, the petitions signed by the thousands, very little has changed in practice. The age of criminal responsibility in England and Wales is still 10. Rehabilitation systems remain underfunded. Anonymity protections remain absolute. And perhaps most troubling of all, child offenders like John Venables continue to receive more shielding from public scrutiny than many adult predators ever will. But there's one thing the courts can't cover up: public memory. And James Bulger's face hasn't faded. It lives in documentaries, in news archives, in petitions, in murals painted on brick walls. It lives in Denise Fergus's tireless advocacy, in Ralph Bulger's emotional interviews, in the strangers who still leave flowers at the old tracks. For many, James isn't just a child who died. He's the symbol of a world that looked away, and a plea to never do it again. In recent years, the case has resurfaced again and again. Each time John Venables returns to court, the nation is reminded that some wounds don't close. In December 2023, when his parole was once again denied, it wasn't just a legal update, it was a public sigh of relief. Parents across the country exhaled. Advocates reignited their efforts. Even members of Parliament spoke out, saying what so many have felt for decades. If rehabilitation is real, then so is the right to transparency, because the public cannot protect its children in the dark. The push for a full public inquiry has gained new ground, not just into the murder, but into everything that came after: the supervision of Venables, the structure of the youth justice system, the moral compass of anonymity orders. In March 2024, the debate made it to the House of Commons, and while no formal inquiry has been launched yet, the tide may finally be turning. And yet, while all of this swirls in the realm of policy and power, James's family is still here, still waiting, still living under the shadow of a name that should have belonged to a happy schoolboy, a teenager, a young man with dreams. Instead, they carry it like a tombstone etched into their daily lives. Denise has written books, founded a charity in James's honor, and continues to speak to schools and communities. She does it not because it heals her, it doesn't, but because someone has to. There's a particular pain in knowing that your child's face is more familiar in death than it ever got to be in life. That his story is studied, debated, and dissected by strangers, while you sit at the center of that storm, unseen. That's what Denise and Ralph have had to carry. And despite the decades, they still haven't stopped hoping for change. The hardest part, though, may be this: knowing that one of James's killers continues to live in the same world he was stolen from. That John Venables, despite his record, despite the images, despite every parole board denial, still has the potential to be released again. Maybe not this year, maybe not next, but eventually. The threat is always there, lingering, like a shadow stretching just out of view. And the idea of that man walking free again with another new identity in another quiet neighborhood, it's unbearable for many. Because how do you protect children from someone you're not allowed to name? How do you teach safety in a world where the threat is protected more than the victims? So where does that leave us? It leaves us with hard truths. That evil can wear the face of a child, that systems can fail so profoundly that justice becomes an illusion, that grief doesn't fade with time, it sharpens. But it also leaves us with a choice: to look away, or to keep telling James's story, to demand transparency, to push for change, to never let his name be reduced to just another case file. Because behind the 42 injuries, the skull fractures, the blue paint, and the lies, there was a little boy who just wanted to go shopping with his mom, who held out his hand in trust, who didn't even get a chance to cry for help before everything went dark. If this case struck a nerve with you, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe lifelong anonymity should be lifted for repeat child offenders? Or do you think the system still has a role in protecting their identities? Drop your comments below, and please, be respectful. This isn't just a debate, it's someone's son. If you believe James's story should never be forgotten, help us spread the truth. Subscribe, share this video, and hit the like button so more people can understand what was lost, and what still needs to be done to protect the next child who trusts the wrong hand. Because James Bulger mattered, he still does.